Our speaker this morning is my good friend, the journalist and activist Jan Barry. And on this Memorial Day weekend, it's particularly appropriate to note that Jan is a combat veteran who served in Vietnam and has dedicated his life to working for peace. This morning, Jan will tell us about Veterans for Peace and what used to be called the Combat Paper Project, but now is called the Frontline Artists Arts Project. How turning military uniforms into paper that's used for art and poetry can transform grief for veterans and their families. Please welcome Jan Barry.
Brought some artwork with me, which you can see on each table to each side of me. As stated, I've been asked to talk about Memorial Day and combat paper, which don't usually come together. Well, we do what's called combat paper in every season. That project is an innovative art program that helps military veterans commemorate what they lost and what gets them through life, not once a year around the end of May, but every day, one day at a time. I've brought some of that work with me. Some of these pieces are by me, plus some other artworks that are on other kinds of materials. And many veterans paint what are painful war images, often for the first time in doing this program. I did some of that, but I find that the anguish lingers in the paintings, and I feel better addressing life after war. So this selection includes a poem I wrote called Make a New History, which is over here. And I'll read what it says. A painting of an Iraq War vet, friend of mine, Eli Wright, kayaking at Monksville Reservoir, taking his head-splitting memories kayaking in a tranquil setting. And a portrait of Kitty Fantastico, who's over here, who was Frank Wagner's devoted companion until he died, and then Kitty Fantastico graced our home until her time ran out. And over here is a painting that I did on art paper of Frank Wagner and another buddy of ours, Mike Eckstein. I'm going to be referring to them later. They both died of illnesses related to Agent Orange. The text of the poem that I referred to before, I learned how to hand set it and print it on this paper made out of a military uniform. The background for that poem is that a long time ago, I resigned from West Point rather than go back to waging war in Vietnam. Make a new history. In harsh, benighted lands, child soldiers learn early how to kill each other with little skills but gory practice. In modern, enlightened lands, gentlemen go to elite schools to learn how to bomb cities and whole nations into oblivion with the latest high-tech devices. Modern sons and daughters are carefully educated in how to dispatch, eliminate, but not call it murder, torment, but not call it torture. Let's make a new history, one where war is banished, outlawed like slavery, one where disputes are resolved, not used as violent excuses. On Memorial Day in 1998, I read a poem to commemorate the Vietnam Veterans Memorial at Pershing Field in Jersey City. That poem still speaks to how I see things today. On Memorial Day, the spring green holiday, we're pledged to remember the dead, the ones from whose grasp life fled. No matter what was done in war, these dead boys are blessed forevermore. But are the dead so forgiving? How do the dead remember the living? Have they forgotten our names? If we were they, Would it be the same? Have we, for those who are dead in our stead, have we made a better world? Not all who lost their lives due to the war in Indochina are listed on this or other war memorials. Let us remember as well the other casualties, Vietnamese, Cambodians, Laotians, our own walking wounded who died at home. In 1975, on the first day of spring, Peter Stuhl of Jersey City died of cancer at age 28. Having survived the killing ground in Indochina, much of which was defoliated by toxic chemicals later suspected of causing cancer and birth defects, Peter learned one day he might not live long enough to see the end of the war. He did not live long enough to enjoy a day of real peace. He did not live long enough to join the battle over Agent Orange waged with his own government, which had authorized these toxic clouds in Vietnam, yet for a long time denied VA treatment and compensation to exposed Vietnam veterans. Peter Stuhl fought and lost a private post-war war. In his diary, he wrote the following poem just before his last Christmas. Our sole nourishment is hope, and we spend our meager supply in vain attempts to make our mirages permanent. Will we ever be one with each other? Can we but see the vast golden fields of grain that wave within us all? Then we would make our lives happy and would fear nothing, strong in the bounty of humanity. In the quarter century since I wrote that poem, many more Vietnam vets have died of cancer from Agent Orange poisoning, self-inflicted gunshot wounds, single car accidents, motorcycle crashes, drug overdoses. Life back at home in America for many vets has been worse than enduring combat zones in Southeast Asia. Official Memorial Day events featuring special holiday sales, Jersey Shore and municipal swimming pool openings, patriotic parades, and thunderous rifle salutes haven't done much to alleviate this anguish. How to counteract war-induced despair has been my second job for most of my life, since getting out of the Army after serving in a Special Operations Aviation Unit in Vietnam. Among other things, I worked with other vets to create what we called rap groups to enable frazzled vets to talk about something that had no name, which was later officially termed post-traumatic stress disorder. In the 1960s, 1970s, young men back from the war in Vietnam were told by VA doctors that whatever your problem is, it was caused by your mother.
Yeah.
In March 2020, a neurology department supervisor at the East Orange VA Medical Center told me that my mother was the reason why I had developed peripheral neuropathy in my feet at age 77. He didn't mention Vietnam or Agent Orange. He didn't know a thing about my mother. This arrogant, deliberately cruel form of disrespect for military service is why some Vietnam vets kill themselves outside VA hospitals. I survived that insult by using one of my self-saving skills, writing about it, sharing the story of that dastardly insult, writing about my experiences in Vietnam in a VA application for financial assistance for post-traumatic stress disorder attached to a VA application for financial assistance for Agent Orange poisoning, noting that I had been diagnosed by civilian doctors with several illnesses on the VA's ever-growing list of Agent Orange-related diseases. I developed writing skills as a survivor skill in working with other Vietnam vets to craft an anthology of poetry by soldiers who served in Vietnam. The book was called Winning Hearts and Minds, War Poems by Vietnam Veterans. We published it ourselves in 1972, as no commercial publisher would touch such a project. Poems in that anthology were then published in the New York Times, Chicago Sun-Times, and other newspapers across the country, numerous commercial and university press anthologies, and amazingly, in an American history textbook. Over the years, I helped to craft and publish several other anthologies of writings by veterans of various wars, including the more recent ones in Afghanistan and Iraq, working with Warrior Writers, a self-help nonprofit organization that provides writing workshops, poetry readings, and publications for military veterans and family members. I also served a stint as Poet Laureate of Veterans for Peace, advocating for world peace and inner peace through creative writing. And a long time ago, I developed a day job as a newspaper reporter, in which, between covering fires, airplane crashes, fatal car accidents, fiery municipal council meetings, I helped many vets and other folks to tell their stories as community activists, as survivors of military misadventures, as life stories in their obituaries. In that job, I did an early investigation into the health questions many Vietnam vets had about Agent Orange and other toxic chemicals widely used in the war. Over the years, I wrote updates on what was being learned about the severe health effects of Agent Orange exposure. That work led to investigations into health concerns about toxic chemicals used in manufacturing plants and haphazardly dumped in New Jersey. This culminated in the Toxic Legacy Report on Ford Motor Company's dumping of lead-based paint sludge in water supply rivers and watersheds, starting with its manufacturing site in Mahwah next to the Ramapo River, and extending to various municipal landfills and wetlands in 2 states and an old mining community inhabited by Ramapo Indians next to Ringwood State Park, the bucolic forest that ended up with truckloads of buried contamination dumped off of old mining and logging roads. People going on hiking trails had no idea what they were hiking through and past. One day I got induced, I'm not sure, maybe it was inducted, into doing artwork, after starting out to write about what some interesting folks were doing. This was around Veterans Day in 2008, just after I retired as a reporter for the Bergen Record and was about to start teaching a journalism course at Rutgers. I went to a combat paper workshop at Rutgers' New Brunswick campus, intending to write about it, and stayed for the rest of the week making paper and art. I was fascinated by the handmade paper process that Iraq war vet Drew Cameron had created, cutting up his Army uniform and mashing it into what he called combat paper. The paper mache-like material is great for painting or ink pressing an image from one's war memories or something that helps cope with such memories, such as Kitty Fantastico. This is personal memorial material. It can also be communal memorial material. Vets and family members and friends and strangers sit down together and talk while cutting up military uniforms. Many American families have had someone in the military with stories about what it's like for parents and spouses, brothers and sisters and cousins at home while a loved one is away in a war. Then there are veteran stories which often haven't been told. War veterans are silent in many cases because they don't believe anybody else can understand the dangers, the depravity, and sometimes sheer terror in their war experiences. The process of sitting around a table working together, cutting up a battle jacket into small pieces, lends itself to blurting out buried memories, triggered by disassembling a military uniform, and then discussing ideas for illustrating that memory in art on the handmade paper about to emerge from this communal gathering. Walter Zimmerman, an astounding artist with work in major galleries who'd served in the Air Force, wrote a poem called Process about a group that gathered in various places in North Jersey to make combat paper. That poem was published in Sound Off Warrior Writers, New Jersey, an anthology I co-edited in 2017. I'm going to sit, actually, if I can just move everything over a little bit. Will I still be on camera? Oh, sorry. I just did in the sound. No. I have something called Parkinsonism, thanks to Agent Orange. It's not the usual standard Parkinson's disease where you go like this. So when I go to the VA hospitals, they say, well, you're not shaking, so you don't have it. On the Agent Orange list at the VA is something called Parkinsonism. They added it only 2 or 3 years ago, just as I was looking to figure out what I had. And when I showed the description to my doctor, he says, that's what you got. It told me instantly that the VA has got so many Vietnam vets in the late 70s coming down with the same symptoms, they gave it a name. They forgot to tell the veterans, and they forgot to tell the public. So I'm constantly running into other veterans who have similar issues, who have never been told that this is a possible name for the issues they're dealing with. But on the other hand, the VA gave me this really great contraption. I can go bird watching. It goes very well over to the butterfly garden in Overbeck Park through the grass, past the horse area. At any rate, to come back to where I was, I'd asked Walter Zimmerman, because he is an artist, could you write a poem describing this process of making this paper? He says, okay. The poem is called Process for Combat Paper by Walter Zimmerman. We walk into a room that was really made for other things, 1 or 2 at a time as a rule, in no particular order, in no particular pattern. Some are younger, some older, some are women, some men, some are wounded one way, some another. We walk into a room we've been allowed to use for our own arcane purposes, our own peculiar tasks. We say hello and joke and maybe have a cup of coffee as we approach, sidle up to really, our apparently unproductive, obsessive, laborious task. In this room we have some uniforms, the military kind. Some are ours, some are not. Some we salvage from the scathing and impersonal danger-ridden places that their masterminds like to call the theater of war. Some of them are given up by next of kin. Some were picked from racks at thrift shops, where, like abandoned shells of hermit crabs, these garments seem to wash up and pool in rows on flimsy hangers. These uniforms, we now, our little group, gather round and start to snip and tear and undo. And we idly talk, as the busy-handed will, of this and that, a baby, a trip, a new pair of shoes, a headache, a pot of delicious beans, and without particular signal, our common history, many-faceted, spanning scores of years, touching one continent or another, begins to reemerge. Perhaps today, snip, 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 it will be an older story brought to mind, something acted out in torrid foreign swaths of green and brown, where the enemy has robbed the orphan of the bag of crackers you just gave her, and then before you know it, she herself has vanished, too. And all the while, unannounced, some chemical that's allegedly your own ally is seeping its way into your bones to work a strange, malign magic. Perhaps today it'll be a newer story of sitting by a river and watching helpless as a clumsy, heavy cargo truck slides inexorably down the bank and flips itself, wheels in the air, over like some ungainly bug, sinking quick into the turgid water until all inside, all in their uniforms, are drowned. And the younger ones among us say they find in hearing tales sometimes before they're even born a sense of their own history, of their identity, their heritage, their role in a still expanding tradition, while the older ones among us find a kind of awful awe in hearing from a different century the same familiar plot, and from the lives of women and men young enough to be our grandkids, young enough to have needed shielding, a protective arm, a place of warm shelter, which it was impossible to give. Slowly, steadily, these uniforms, these artifices built as fabric lies to hide even from ourselves our inborn basic differences, these uniforms come undone, separate into drifting tectonic plates of polycotton fabric. They break down even further into strips, into bits, and then into a watery mix, shapeless, blurry, like half-remembered dreams. And this is the transition point, the metaphoric place where one reality ebbs away while another takes its place, where everything we mean when we say uniform, even, flat, indistinguishable one from another, interchangeable apparently without end, disappears, and something else emerges, made up of this very same stuff, of course, but profoundly rearranged. The ranks of warp and weft undone, the rigid pulling tension that gives the cloth its strength relieved, released. The twisted threads themselves chafed down to single fibers adrift, without rank, without differentiation. And now, these liberated bits of string are brought together in a different way, the way that we, while disassembling all this cloth, have found amongst ourselves a life-entwining companionship, and where we begin with a set of fabric disguises, now we have flat and blank, the stuff not unlike what the wasps make when they build their nests. Just paper, you might say, but waiting, as paper so often does, for something else, something odd perhaps to happen. How unspectacularly wonderful, in the way that a wasp nest is, so ordinary and miraculous all at once. That identity-suppressing clothes become the platform in the field on which each one of us now can tell our single tale, our own vision, however different, however unofficial, how unique, of what went down out there, of what goes on in here, for and by, among all of us, in a room that was really made for other things. A shorter, poignant poem about what this creative process meant to a Vietnam vet haunted by 50-year-old battle memories was written by Frank Wagner, who died at home in Bogota of cancer from Agent Orange in 2019. Frank's poem was called When I Feel Blue. When I feel blue, I get out the wet palette, canvas, brushes, paint, and undo. The blue softens it to a hue like, hey you, what are you doing with that brush in your hand? I'm going to make soft clouds, intermingling with powder blue morn, unwind, and work myself into a new state of mind. Frank was a colorful member. Many of you might have met him at the time, back in the day, of a feisty group of vets who did art workshops together, meeting at combat paper-making sites and at the Secaucus Vet Center, a VA site for addressing post-traumatic stress in a low-stress office park setting. Despite anxiety, depression, post-traumatic disorder, insomnia, night vision problems, and other health woes, the generally sarcastic old warriors trekked through Jersey traffic to get to art workshops and to pridefully participate in public displays of their art. In a program book for one of these shows, I wrote, transforming war uniforms into art and combat paper workshops, many military veterans in New Jersey and across the nation have traded the familiar grip of rifles for scissors, carving knives, paintbrushes, and other healing implements of art. Meanwhile, veterans attending the Paint Your Pain art group at the Secaucus Vet Center have been exploring a wide variety of media from watercolors to pen and ink to oil paintings to probe, uncover, and convey hard-to-express experiences. The art workshop at the Secaucus Vet Center provides a gathering place for veterans to share art making and post-combat survivor tips. The Printmaking Center of New Jersey's Combat Paper New Jersey program is run by veterans for veterans. It provides welcoming settings where veterans can explore art to recover from physical, psychological, and emotional effects of war. In workshops at college campuses, community centers, art studios, VA hospitals, and military installations, combat paper brings the ancient arts of hand papermaking and printmaking to veterans of all conflicts. Quote, we deconstruct, reclaim, and communicate, David Keefe, an Iraq War veteran and the director of the Combat Paper New Jersey project, said of turning old uniforms into paper used to display vets' artworks. Quote, it's the perfect marriage of concept and medium. It transforms the material, the artist, and the viewer. For a number of years, vets from New Jersey were asked to do these programs at Walter Reed Hospital. For people who were so severely wounded, that's where they had to be living. They also did it at the military, I don't know if they still have it, had residential PTSD programs at various places, including Fort Belvoir, Virginia. People on active duty with such severe post-traumatic stress disorder problems, they had to go to a residential program to get assistance. And so this group coming from New Jersey helped them do this process. And Paula and I went to an event in which these vets on active duty were reading their poetry and showing their artwork. And one of the points that they made was the doctors never listen to us. So we have to tell our own story. The book I'm reading from is called Waging Art. Tackling Grief and Trauma with Creative Arts. I wrote this book a couple of years ago as a way of recovering from a series of small strokes that threw me for a loop during the COVID epidemic. I literally recovered writing and bookmaking and living skills piece by piece. In piecing my life back together, I made some clarifying realizations, which I'll read from another part of this book. Seldom discussed amid the war fever that swept the world since September 2001 is that peace at home is another casualty of the shock and awe bombing tactics loosed by fighters on all sides, our armed forces included. For veterans, triggers such as certain sights, sounds, smells yank veterans of military actions into moments our minds try to bury. Terms like post-traumatic stress disorder and moral injury don't begin to describe what it's like to instantly be snatched back into a bad time. Art and writing workshops for veterans try to pin these demons down, drag them out of these nightmare places into the light of day. Among these demons is the relentless epidemic of suicide by fellow vets. Some of these vets' lives and deaths had a great impact on me. I was also haunted by the news media policy when I was a news reporter, including the newspapers I worked for, of rarely reporting deaths by suicide. I've lost where I am. This hid the full scope of this epidemic, which decimated Vietnam veterans well before the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq took an horrendous toll on younger men and women. I forgot exactly what year it was, but well into the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Associated Press finally pinned down enough details to start saying there's an epidemic for that generation that hasn't yet been made public. Once I retired from daily journalism, it became clearer as I spent more time in veterans' art circles that artists, poets, novelists, singers often address forbidden, hidden, taboo topics well before the news media dares to do so. The first draft of history on some issues is not always printed in a newspaper, but revealed in a poem or a painting or a song. This Memorial Day, I'd like to memorialize some amazing vet artists in our North Jersey group who died in recent years. There's a painting over here of two of these guys I'm going to talk about. Joe Liss died on April 11th, 2018 of complications of Parkinson's disease related to Agent Orange poisoning. He was 71. Michael Eckstein died on June 18th, 2019 of complications of surgery for spinal injuries. He was 74. Frank Wegner died on November 11th, 2019 of complications from cancer related to Agent Orange poisoning. He was 77. And I have one more person I'd like to add to that memorialization list. This past December, Jim Fallon of Hoboken joined that distinguished group, dying of cancer, most likely from Agent Orange exposure. Here's a poem I wrote for Jim called Jim Fallon Presente. Damn lucky medic in Vietnam takes a hit in his right arm 20 years later from Agent Orange. Examines being disabled by bone cancer intensive surgery and helps other vets navigate the VA. Switch hits to lefty painter when he can't play jazz drums anymore, and marches against the Iraq War to the cadences of Vets for Peace. We know what we're marching for. Stop the killing, stop the war. He couldn't draw a straight line when he started art workshop. Now holds court as his art wins awards. Hey, did I ever tell you this story about the time I ran a jazz club? Raconteur days cut short by getting cancer in the throat. Damn, war's hell, even if you make it to 84. So long, old buddy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Jen,
Oh, I have some.
yeah. Jan, thank you so much for your reminiscences and for your continuing to warn against the repetition of past tragedy.
Thank you.
We have time for questions, reflections, resonations. As we did before with joys and concerns, we'll share 2 from the room and 2 from Zoom. Before we start, I'd like to make one observation. Jan has a selection of books back there. They are for sale, and he is willing to autograph them. My understanding is that the proceeds from these sales will go toward helping veterans groups. Am I right about that, Jan?
Yeah, to the frontline art groups.
To the frontline art groups. Okay, good. So pay close attention to those books. So 2 from the room. First, Lisa.
Yeah, so Jan, Ron,
Oh, 1 second. Let me, yeah. No, for Zoom.
yeah, so, you mentioned all the symptoms and diseases due to Agent Orange and the war that vets are suffering from. Ron and I have often talked about how we wonder, we know so many people with Parkinson's disease, and we say, like, what's this about? Like, this didn't always seem to be there. And not just Parkinson's, but other neurological diseases, ALS and others. Do you think, or do you know, that these are a cause of Agent Orange? And is there any research on that, like specifically Parkinson's?
Agent Orange was made of the same herbicides that you could buy and put on your garden or your lawn to kill, whatever you wanted to kill. I saw a story online very recently that some research indicates that people who live near golf courses have higher incidences of Parkinsonism. So there's the relationship. And when I tried to do investigations for a newspaper into what was going on, the government didn't want to know the answer. So Vietnam veterans had to press and discovered, well, they'd done this research already in Europe. They had the same problems in Europe. They did the research. This government didn't want the public to know.
not, not all who served were American citizens. People who lived in Hawaii and Alaska, because they were not states, were not incarcerated with the rest of the Japanese people who lived in the lower 48. I had a very good friend when I got my first job at the age of 17. I had to earn some money before I went to college because I had to pay rent. I had a very good friend. Her name was Yuri Hayashi. Her American name was Frances, and she came from Hawaii. Now, she had an older brother. She showed me his picture. Tall, handsome, and people from Hawaii and Alaska, even Japanese, could enroll in the American military. And he did. He became an American soldier. They couldn't send him to the Orient, so they sent him to Europe, to Germany.
Yeah.
There's our question in that.
And he is buried somewhere in Germany, where he died for this nation.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Zoom now. Are there comments, questions on Zoom? Peter, want to?
Yes.
So I see that
Rich
Rich Askins is up.
Thank you. I want to thank you very much for everything you related today. I was personally never in the military, but I'm an only child of a longtime military person who tried to kill me when I was 13 because he was so damaged by his experiences in life, especially in the military, that he was half crazy by the time I was born. He was 57 when I was born. And I have been trying to understand him all my life. Some of the things you related have helped to some extent. And what I see is that humanity is just not fully developed yet. The difference between FDR and our current president is our current president uses his humanity, whatever there is of it, to be aggressive and to hurt other people. FDR, who was not perfect, only knew that we would at some point have to fight fascism, and he tried to prepare the country for it. Now, my belief is in a democracy, you never start a war, and we have started wars, especially recently. But sometimes you have to defend what you know is better than something else. The tragedies that you talk about the individuals, very different from my father, and yet in general, all the same. I think he died prematurely. He turned over in a motor cart on the sidecar because they had to swerve to avoid a truck. And from then on, and he was very different. He had anger management problems. They let him out of the Army. He still had no other skills. He tried to go into the Navy for 6 months. He ended up in the Coast Guard because back then they would take just about anyone, and he got his 20 years of service in. But he was a wreck of a man and becoming more and more so before I was ever born. He had PTSD. I don't know if you've ever listened to George Carlin, who is recently dead, a brilliant comment, although he uses crazy swear words. It was originally called shell shock in World War I.
Yeah.
Exactly what it was. And then it turned later into battle fatigue. More syllables removed from the battle lines. And now it's called PTSD. So it's clinical. It doesn't say what really happened. Now, in one sense, it's good because it helps them analyze it. But in others, for people who aren't experts in this field, it gets them more removed from the war. And no one wants to be involved in war, really, except for a few crazy people from their childhood. I could have gone that way, but I happily went to Princeton. It was one saving thing from my parents. They believed in a good education, although they themselves never got out of middle school. And they gave me that, but they also gave me what people have called a type of post-traumatic stress syndrome, since he tried to kill me and she did too.
Hey.
They were trauma bonded. So I'm a generational casualty of war in a way. Not as bad as you guys, but bad enough. I've been in therapy all my life. And I want to thank you so much for presenting what you have today. It's really helped me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rich. Thank you. Is there anyone else on Zoom who'd like to contribute a reminiscence, a question, a reflection? How about in the room? Yes, Nadej.
You mentioned several times that you're not, that your experience with the VA is a culture of silence and dismissal. I'm wondering what's in it for them not to tell the veterans the source of their issues. Why is it that way? Do you have an idea?
By the late 1960s, the VA had become basically an old age home for World War II veterans. And unless you were a member of the American Legion, Vietnam vets were told you can't get into the VA. The local American Legion would often say to a Vietnam veteran, get out of here, you lost your war. So in many ways it was a generational exclusion of their sons. Not necessarily their own individual son, but the generational to me was outrageous. That was part of it. Another part of it I never understood because at a certain point Vietnam veterans were running the American Legion. But these cultural attitudes still continued for many people working at the VA. To dismiss people as opposed to helping them solve something that maybe it wasn't so obvious, whatever it is they had to deal with. And yet at the same time, various other people would sort of sneak in innovative things. So that when I started having these problems and trying to figure out what the VA could do to help me, I stumbled across the fact that they had an online medical yoga session. A woman who was a doctor who decided to study yoga and then explained to vets, when you do these particular movements, this is why what it's helping you. For peripheral neuropathy in the feet, which the VA neurology doctor said there's nothing you can do about it, she said, keep moving them around. That gets the blood circulation going. Duh, why can't the doctors learn, what this other person decides she wants to understand and then convey to? So the VA is a huge place in which you have to shop around. And you suddenly discover by word of mouth something you had no idea even existed. Yet at the same time, every time I go to the neurology department, I see a different doctor, and none of them ever have any idea what I'm talking about.
Sorry, back there, here, then here, okay, all right?
Hi, just quickly, Lisa, on the point you made about Parkinson's disease, we're right, as you know, we're right next to the rail tracks where the trains are idling 24/7, and one of the diseases caused by diesel exhaust is Parkinson's disease. And I know some of the people you're talking about, and it's something I've raised in town, and I was like, kind of like what Jan was saying about Agent Orange, be quiet, be quiet. On the issue of what's going on now with the VA, it's going to be harder and harder for people to get services as 83,000 or more people are getting fired, or probably all will be fired. So it's going to be quite a fight to turn that around. June 6th is a day that's been set aside for some actions around saving the VA and not letting it get privatized, which is their goal, to get it privatized. So there'll be things all over the country that day, including, I think, at East Orange VA.
Thank you, Paula.
Gail, then Ron.
This is a bit of a tangent, but as we're thinking about how governments respond and what we have done in the past, I just wanted to share another fallout of Agent Orange. I had the occasion to be visiting hospitals and orphanages in Vietnam about 15, 20 years ago. And I'm very familiar with children with congenital problems, but I had never, ever seen what I was seeing there. And I said to the staff, "What's this all about?" And they said, "These children are born in the land that has the Agent Orange, and it's going on generation after generation." And so we're now still having victims of Agent Orange being born.
Thank you, Gail.
Last Thursday, Lisa and I and Jonathan and Carol went to see the Anne Frank exhibit at the Jewish History Museum in New York. And aside from the recreation of where Anne Frank hid herself and her family, was really a very long explanation of the Holocaust with photographs, how early it started, how we got to the Holocaust, all the killing that occurred during the Holocaust, not just from the gas ovens, but from just outright murders of Jews before that. And it struck me, the contrast between the Jewish nation being almost completely destroyed by these murders and the war in Gaza at the present time. The similarities of it, the quote unquote final solution for this age-old problem between these two groups that the now Israeli government seems to be pursuing, which was the same solution that Hitler sought to eradicate the Jewish race. I wonder, have you ever given thought to what is it about human nature that believes that killing and murder and violence is the answer to social issues or differences between nations? What is it about us that glorifies war? Why are we having parades to glorify these wars that we got through?
I grew up in Protestant churches. The Old Testament, as you may very well remember, had God killing this group of people and killing that group of people and drowning the rest of those people, and don't turn around or you turn into a pillar of salt, etc., etc., etc. That's where so many, in my experience, Americans learned, even before we have the patriotism in our own country. Plus, you know, in the Protestant churches, they sing "Onward, Christian Soldiers," great glorious hymn. It's baked into our society, culture, in so many different kinds of ways. A lot of it we just sort of take for granted, and then the people who know how to manipulate all this stuff manipulate it.
Jerry.
I often, almost every day, do my walking, which is really a marching song to the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which was one of the first songs that came out of the American Civil War.
It's got a good tune to it, good beat.
The march. Well, that's the same tune as John Brown's Body, which came before, which was about release of slavery.
Jonathan.
I just want to piggyback on what Ron said. One thing that struck me is, and I didn't know, is the number of Jewish people that fought for Germany in World War I. Thousands upon thousands. It was 30,000, I think. And it just goes to show how people who fight in wars are basically viewed as disposable. Mm-hmm. You know, there was, obviously 10 years later, oh no, you didn't help us. Thank you for nothing.
Yeah.
Do we have anyone new online who hasn't spoken yet?
Afina, I think, has her hand.
Oh.
In addition to, actually, I think most of it is also money. Because whoever makes the weapons, whoever makes all that stuff, doesn't want anybody to protest and just wants to make the money. And so they come up with reasons to make these things that are, and then convince the common people to go along with it.
If I can add on that too, that after World War II, that when they had all these chemical weapon plants all the way through Vietnam, to keep the chemical companies in, that they converted those things into insecticides and fertilizers and rodenticides and all the stuff that you are now spraying on your yard. And so those things like glyphosate should have been banned a long time ago, since Agent Orange days, but they're still used. You can purchase Roundup and still in some states.
Good point, Kurt. Thank you. I see that online, I see that Rich has his hand raised again. Did you mean to do that, or is it still raised from before, Rich?
I'm going to lower my hand because it's not, I need to talk to Ron about this, but not here.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone, especially Jan Barry. Thank you, Jan. Thank you. And I want to thank everyone here and online for paying such close attention and reflecting and responding. And let's keep fighting.
To learn more about us, visit our website, ethicalfocus.org, or email us at admin@ethicalfocus.org, and we'll get back to you. To make a donation, go to ethicalfocus.org/donate. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can watch many of our past programs on our YouTube channel.